Hello, Regenerative Renegades. We're glad you're back with us. Last episode, Dr. Stephan Van Vliet with Utah State University introduced us to his fascinating work of defining nutrient density in beef. But we just scratched the surface. In this next episode, Dr. Van Vliet describes what sets apart holistically grazed grass-fed beef. He details how diverse grasslands equate to improved nutritional quality in beef and beyond. And regenerative renegade farmers are a core piece of that. His work in this episode gives me hope. I hope you enjoy.
I mean, I think many people would argue that maybe the best steak they ever ate was grass-fed, but the worst steak they ever ate was also grass-fed, right? So,
I agree. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you have to, but that deepness of flavor is perhaps also something that you need to become accustomed to. And perhaps within the U.S. society at the moment, we're more adapted to the corn-fed beef.
Absolutely. I mean, we're very accustomed to that style, that type of beef, and the practices that went into it. I know when I sample consumers in grocery stores, I warn everybody, first of all, to your point, anybody who's really tried numerous grass-fed steaks has probably had a bad experience because of really, there's a host of reasons, but primarily genetics and finishing were not adequate on the forage for those two matching up and producing a great steak. But then on the other side, it's like, oh, wow, they put that product in their mouth and like, wow, this reminds me of a steak I had at grandma's 50 years ago, and it's so fun to see that because people say, well, describe it for me. Well, it's like, well, it's a fuller flavor. It probably has more texture than a mushy grain-fed steak. You're going to have to chew it most likely. But the flavor and the moisture level and the meat and all that, I'm very, very biased. I understand that. But we are accustomed to that, and it would be really nice to play a role in changing that and giving people at least the option of trying something else.
And that flavor profile that you described, Matt, that is actually phytochemicals that people are tasting. They're tasting. So that's it. We study that from a health perspective, and that's maybe my bias because I come at it from a human nutrition standpoint, and I'm not a food scientist. So I don't study flavor or things such as that. Well, I mean, you could argue I study it, but we come at it from this standpoint of phytochemicals from the health side of things. But the literature, coming back to the French and Italian literature on the cheeses, they do not so much come at it from a health standpoint, but more from a flavor standpoint. That's what they were interested in. But then when I looked at that data as a human nutrition scientist, I'm thinking like, hey, wait a minute, these are compounds that have antioxidant effects, anti-inflammatory effects. They can improve cardiovascular health. They, when you throw them on a cancer cell, they maybe are able to reduce tumor growth. Not to say that grass-fed beef will prevent cancer. I want to make that 100% clear. But I mean, these compounds that are in there, they have potent health benefits, potentially. Definitely have potent health benefits within the animal. That part I feel comfortable stating. But they also have potent flavor benefits. So this comes back to this connection between health and flavor. And
really, to me, it's kind of like survival. Like if something's really good for you, to have it reflected in the taste is awesome. And somehow we've got to this place where, well, if anything's good for you, it's probably going to taste bad. But the way nature designed it, the way it's designed is if it's full of those phytochemicals, it's going to be more flavorful, and hence you're going to desire that more, which is going to help your survival, right? I mean, it seems like that's all connected.
Yeah, it is all connected. And I think the most thoughtful example could be if you pick a fresh strawberry in a season locally, because obviously with strawberries. Yeah, it tastes great, right? And otherwise, it might taste a little bit bland. And I think carrots are the same thing. Is it hard to maybe get children to eat carrots? Perhaps, but then a fresh carrot grown in a rich soil. I mean, I argue it tastes like candy. Yeah,
candy.
That's right. Yeah.
My dad has used that phrase for cherry tomatoes out of our garden my whole life. It's like, go out, pick the cherry tomatoes. They're like candy. He says it every year. I hear him every year say it. He's still alive. God bless him. but that was exactly at our garden, those vegetables. And then when you're forced out of season to go buy them at the grocery store, you're like, okay, I can eat this, but I'm not craving it. I'm not
No.
going, oh, I'm going to have another one of those. That's really good. And that's anything, cucumbers, tomatoes, squash, grown in that rich soil, which we need to regenerate in this country. But yeah, you try that, there's nothing else like it.
No, and also this speaks back to humans, right? Because I mean, yes, we're using modern scientific techniques to look at that, but I mean, the humans would have not have survived if they could not link flavor to health, right?
There
And
you go. Yes.
so
Yeah.
it's a lot of it is just putting scientific data behind it, but it's if
How
in the
about
lab
Go ahead.
if in the lab we eat that strawberry right ourselves, and then eat the other strawberry, then without running it through a mass spec, we would do it. But I mean, we can observe it already. It's not like like it's not magic either, right? And then you test it and you see, well, all these compounds are like threefold elevated in this strawberry, which is not surprising because that's the flavor that it gives flavor to those compounds or to those fruits as well. And the same thing, like with grass-fed beef, which I understand is a little bit, and flavor and taste is subjective. But what we can say is that grass-fed beef is more complex.
Yes. Yes, definitely more complex. So that makes me think we've all heard anecdotally about how the level of nutrition in an apple or pick your fruit or food or whatever over the past, I don't know, 60, 70, 80 years, whatever the time period is of our more industrialized agriculture. So that has happened. We all know that we've heard there's less nutrition and that maybe that's a link to obesity because of the craving for the nutrition encourages us to eat more calories. But do you have any data or insights from a scientific standpoint about it, A, the causes of that, and B, the levels of that denigration of nutrition?
Yeah, there is some interesting work on that for sure within both studies from the UK and the US. And these studies have predominantly looked at minerals, because minerals we've been able to measure those fairly easily since probably the 50s or so. And what that shows is that you see a decrease in various minerals ranging from 20, 50% or something like that. This could be related to soil health, but it could also be related to selecting for high yielding varieties. So this is commonly referred to as the dilution effect, which is quite literally you have diluted it because let's say the blueberry that you used to grow was this big and now it's this big. So it has more water, it is bigger, it yields better, but it has the same absolute amount of minerals, but you just increase the size of the blueberry twice, or you increase the size of the carrot, right? So this is, it's partly this dilution effect due to breed selection. The other part could be due to also depletion of nutrients within the soil. So it's probably a combination of the two. So I think moving forward, if you ask me, it's finding a balance between nutrient density and yield. And if we can strike a balance to that, I think we are in a good spot for sure. And
isn't wheat a good example of that, where the breeding, the hybriding of wheat has raised the gluten levels and also decrease the nutrient density?
Yeah, you end up increasing the protein content, increasing the starch content, and it has to do with, there's no blaming the farmers or industry for that. What are you being paid for? You're being paid per ton of wheat or ton of corn. You're not being paid for nutrient density. If you were being paid for nutrient density, then that dilution effect would not do very well. And
we got to get there. We got to get there to that nutrition. What's the value of the food that you're producing, not the volume of the food that you're producing?
Yeah, and this also feeds in. I mean, there's some suggestion of that within the literature. I mean, you can see this more so within animals. Coming back to a cow, right? A cow will overeat on its ration to obtain the nutrients that it needs. We notice from rodents in animal work that rodents would overeat to get the nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
In humans, that could also be the case. Why do we eat more calories? Because the calories that we're eating have less vitamins and minerals and other phytochemicals. So if we are like any other animal, and we probably are, we're just do slightly better on a math test. But other than that, metabolically, slightly better. That's right. Although, depending on the scenario that you look at, right? I put my, in terms of survival out in the wild, I'd probably put my money on a pig. But on a math test, I would put my money on a human. Yep. But other than that, we're not metabolically that different. So it's really hard to prove these things out in humans because we live complex lives and have a bunch of other things going on, right?
But it makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah. Cravings, are real. Why do we have the craving? What are we actually craving besides calories? We feel hungry, but what are we hungry for other than just pure energy?
Yeah. And this is called in the literature called hidden hunger. It means that you get this paradox where people eat a lot of calories, they are overweight and obese, but they have a micronutrient deficiency, and that is obviously a very strange thing if you think about that, because that is a modern phenomenon where you're adequately fed in terms of calories, but you're not adequately fed in terms of micronutrients, and this is again. There's some initial work, and this is extrapolating from the literature, but we know these phytochemicals have antioxidant effects. They protect us from metabolic disease, and those have also gone down quite considerably within our diets. I know metabolic disease, such as heart disease and obesity, diabetes, cancer, they have multiple reasons for it. But potentially one of the reasons could be is that we're ingesting less phytochemicals within our diet because our foods are now less phytochemically rich. So we have
more processed.
More processed indeed. And as a result, it probably plays a role in the rise of metabolic disease.
Isn't there a link with the Western diet? If you just talk Western diet for a little bit and the omega-6, omega-3 ratio, but when cultures move from their native diet and start to adopt more of a Western diet, I think these go hand in hand, don't they?
They do go hand in hand, and you can especially see it with folks that switch quite rapidly. Let's say there's interesting studies from people from Southeast Asia that then move over maybe to the US and they abandon their traditional diet within one generation. You see that the health deteriorates really, really fast. And there's some nice work in native peoples as well that show that. I mean, don't get me wrong, even amongst Northwest Europeans, your health will go down the crapper eventually. But since we ate refined grains probably a little bit earlier, we're a little bit adapted to that. But yes, the standard Western diet, no one seems to get healthier from that. And the reason is, I think, if you ask me, is that 2/3 of it is ultra-processed foods. And in terms of ultra-processed foods, we're not talking about like fortified almond milk or tofu or something like that. That's probably pretty good for you. But it's, cookies, pastries, pizza, TV dinners that are probably not as nutritious as the fresh thing. There's a lot of maybe,
fake
extra.
Meat, maybe.
Yeah, or fake meat. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say like the studies would not suggest that is unhealthy per se, but it would also what it does suggest is that it's not a one-to-one nutritional replacement compared to beef because you have a similar protein content. But there has been 2 trials done on that suggest that it is compatible with good health, at least in the short term. Obviously, long term, we don't know because the nutritional profile is just so different. But and you could argue that maybe eating a more like artisanal black bean burger or just some legumes or some actual black beans might be better for you. Perhaps, I don't know. And there's probably a benefit of eating maybe those black beans with some beef because they are very much nutritionally different. And to top it off, and here's where it really becomes interesting, the synergy of food. Let's say you make a chili and you put in both beans and beef. Actually, the iron uptake from the beans is improved because of the presence of that beef. And this comes back again to sort of the work that we do in the metabolomic space. We don't really know what type of nutrients are responsible for that. It's called the meat factor. It basically means that if you have meat with certain plant foods, you can actually increase the uptake of iron and zinc from those plant foods because of the unidentified compounds within meat that can actually help with that. It's probably, I mean, it's a guesstimate, but people have hypothesized that it might be choline, it might be other cofactors that are within the meat that can actually aid in the absorption of non-heme iron from plants. And that, of course, is really interesting, and it speaks back to the benefit of consuming an omnivorous diet, where 1 + 1 is not 2, it's 3, right? Because you're able to better capitalize on the nutrients within the plant when you eat this with some ground beef in your chili.
That's awesome. So the bottom line is, instead of making your steak a salad, put steak on your salad.
I would say that is, I would argue for that an omnivorous diet is arguably if I look at this from a human nutrition standpoint, and we do food profiling both on animal source foods, but also on crops, there's overlap, but they're also very much different. And if we accept, and there's a lot of studies that suggest that dietary diversity or phytochemical diversity is associated with good health, I personally do not see why you want to exclude either one if you can, if you're able to consume both, because you get just this synergistic or effect where they are complementary to each other. And some nutrients are found in plant source foods. Other nutrients are found in animal source foods. And certainly, even though if a cow is consuming, or a goat, maybe that's more of an example, plants that are purple, right? Flowering plants, they get anthocyanidins.
Oh.
They might transfer them into metabolized versions, but I would still say that goat meat is maybe not a proper replacement for just eating a blueberry yourself, which would also provide you with anthocyanidins. But as I mentioned, the goat would eat plants that most humans would consider weeds. And for a goat, that is just feed. And with cows also, you could arguably train them to, but you could probably speak better to that than I can, train them to consume certain plants that may be initially considered unpalatable or not preferred.
For sure. I got a question a couple days ago in a presentation I was giving from a vegan who had a vegan diet about eating beef, and he had stated, well, I quit eating beef because of the environmental effects and use of water and numerous, more environmental factors, not considering nutrition really. And I just wanted to point out that it's not the cow, it's the how on its practices, because when you are grazing cattle, for example, there's so much beneficial impact on the land that they're grazing as far as regenerating soil, providing wildlife habitat, improving the water cycle, so that improving the organic matter in the soil so the water can be absorbed by the soil, that really the beef is a byproduct of all the benefits of just that managed grazing on the land. And that if you're concerned about that, really just make sure you're eating pastured or grass-fed or the type of beef that allows it to have this positive impact, pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, for example, by having more green days and more photosynthesis happening, and putting that carbon in the soil helps to regenerate it. But they're just the cattle are such a fantastic tool for what I believe we need to do in our food system, that I'd really want to urge people to think about that and not just take the one fell swoop and say, cattle bad, not going to eat them. They're just bad for everybody. They're bad for the environment, bad for our water, all of that. So it's more nuanced than that, in what I've witnessed.
Yeah, I would agree with those nuances, and certainly, given the environment that we have created, right? I think it's probably the right thing to find a balance between wildlife and then also managed grazing, because yes, we have created roads, we have created infrastructure, we have created homes, right? So which makes the rewilding part a very important piece because that's obviously the argument that people would give you. But maybe within, well, I know you're a little bit outside of an urban environment, but still a habited environment. If you were able to manage animals and use that for the good, I think that is a viable way, and we need to certainly find a good balance on that. And again, it's like, yes, I agree, cow and the how, and then also, but here I'm maybe playing devil's advocate, and I can certainly appreciate that, Matt, because it's easy talking for me, because I'm not raising goats in my backyard, but the multi-species is also, I think, a key thing. And I don't know how we maybe get consumers to do that. Certainly more popular in Europe is that also having very efficient herbivores in there, like geese and duck and rabbits and things such as that, right? Like that also exploit different niches. And there's a lot of studies to suggest that, yeah, you can really stick enterprises on the same field and produce more pound of, however you want to put this, pounds of meat or pounds of food, or in this case, we make the argument for nutrient density, but that also more nutrient dense. But that does require a shift, because obviously people would say sometimes, and it's all modeling, of course, is that, yeah, we cannot have all cows out on pasture.
Right.
And maybe that's true. But there are studies that would suggest that integrating multiple herbivores, and stack those on the same land, then you are able to hold more herbivores. But that would also require people to eat other sources of meat, and typically there needs to be well, maybe consumer preference can switch. Typically there needs to be a large-scale cataclysmic event that forces people to start eating rabbits, right?
Right.
And knock on wood, let's hope that's not the reason for that to happen. But you get my point, right? It's
Yeah, I do. And then, that links to just financial survival. I get quite a few young people that want the lifestyle of homesteading and raising their food, but they also need to earn a living. And that path is not by, if you're starting off with no land and no real attachment to any kind of like legacy land, the way to survive is to actually stack those enterprises. So if you had 10 acres, okay, what species could you put on 10 acres, stack them, produce the meat of whatever it is, vegetables, fruit, honey, whatever. Now that's the way to financial survival. It's not by buying cattle and a bunch of land. That whole industry is really difficult to enter and to turn a profit, even if you do enter it. So that's what I encourage people to do, is exactly what you described, which actually works great for the environment as well. So it's great that those two, financial survival and the beneficial effects of the environment, work hand in hand.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, especially with land prices these days. Indeed, if you have a smaller amount, and then you're kind of forced, and usually those things are what move the needle. I hate to say it, but usually it's like when people change when they need to change, right? Or when the environmental factors forces them to change. I mean, I often talk to farmers so often that have gone down the path of regenerative agriculture, is that they were forced for some reason to do that, right? Like either for financial reasons or other reasons. It's like, okay, I need to switch over my business in order to remain viable. And then, so I think that's a fantastic path. And indeed, you have this you create a synergistic effect for sure, where it's likely that your plant diversity increases. It benefits the bees, right? If you're producing honey, that honey is going to be more nutrient dense.
Yes.
Maybe the forages grow faster, then the cow is going to benefit from that. And you get this synergistic effect. And I think that part is that, when I speak to ranchers, and I think that's where the research will need to head in the future, is that you probably empirically observe that is the case. And I hear that from a lot of farmers that empirically observe that. But then if I go back to my office and read the literature, that is not immediately clear. There is some work in there, but, I can definitely convince myself within half an hour that grass-fed operation I just was is the worst thing ever for the environment, right? But that probably means we're not capturing. If I look at modeling on an Excel spreadsheet, right, where it's like, okay, needs this much water, produces this much greenhouse gas, uses this much land, but it does not capture all of those nuances you just described. And I think that complexity needs to be incorporated into research and trying to capture, how that does, and hopefully that can also then help with policy. But in order to move the needle on food policy, we do need hard data. But it is, of course, I mean, like I said, if you're testing grass-fed beef outside on pasture or feedlot beef, then it cannot be a complete surprise that yields a different metabolic profile and a different nutrient density profile, because the diets are just day and night different.
Well, and on that whole stacking of enterprises, I just crossed my mind to something we realized last year. We've got honeybees on the farm, right, in various locations, and the man that manages them was wondering why we were producing more honey than other locations. And what I realized was because we're mimicking nature on how we graze the land and we allow the plants to recover, we could have a plant bloom 3 or 4 times in the growing season, but left to its own devices without any grazing or disruption, it would bloom once and then it would be done for the season. So we have red clover blooming in September because we let it rest for 45 days from the last time it was grazed, which then the honeybees love because they're getting this food source multiple times moving around, and they just, they find it. We don't have to show them anything, but if it's there and readily available, they keep working as long as it's there. We haven't even begun to understand not only the benefits, but just how everything works symbiotically in nature when you can get as close as possible to replicating it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's something we can definitely observe. And that's why I also feel to an extent is that, I mean, it's very likely that populations or generations before us, or even civilizations before us had figured these things out. Otherwise, we would not have survived, right? Because there have been plenty of agricultural civilizations before this that had very elaborate systems and probably knew. Why did people figure out across the globe that maybe, think about it like here in Native America, right? Or Native Americans, like the three sisters, like squash and beans and things. Like you have beans and rice that go well together, and squash that grows well, and it has agricultural benefits. So it's likely that.
Can you just explain that a little bit for people who aren't familiar with the three sisters concept?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like it's like if and it comes back to growing plant diversity in the past when you would grow multiple crops together, and there's especially a large body of literature that's growing like beans and squash, for instance, together. Have very beneficial effects for soil health, but also for the plant. And then if you likely incorporated that with other plant sources as well, you get this synergy. And so I think we're seeing that in modern science is that a polyculture of plants is typically better for soil health. It is better for biodiversity. And what we're finding out now is that typically that healthy competition, or maybe it's even a partnership, because that's how it was described, as a partnership, is actually beneficial for the plant. And but in our current days, we grow most of the things in monocultures, and that is actually not the best way. And it maybe another analogy to use is that this healthy competition. If you are running a marathon by yourself, you probably run slower than if you have a couple other people running with you, right? And you can benefit from each other and feed off each other and motivate each other. And maybe in plant chemistry, there's arguably something similar going on. And then putting an animal on top of that as well, that capitalizes on that synergy, is something that we can, I think, observe empirically and see it.
Well, I think it's just fascinating that burgeoning study of those relationships that the plants have when there's diverse plants and how they're sharing resources, basically, on from what I understand, water or energy or nutrients or whatever that
Yeah.
neighboring plant needs, that there's this whole thing happening, but that can only happen if you have a diversity of plants. And I see it with my eyes as we've increased the diversity of, 20 years ago, we thought we were diverse by planting 4, 5, 6 grasses and legumes together. And we thought, okay, well, that's good. And as we've increased that to include more native plants, more grasses,
Yeah.
and we get a cocktail of 20 plus plants, well, we see that field that we converted from monoculture to diverse grassland perform better in all different types of weather that happens in a year. That's those plants figure it out if they have enough tools at their ready.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's true, and it also indeed on a pasture you see this with like multi-species. So, maybe you have various legumes in there with other grasses, or as he's in the three sisters, right? You had like corn, and then with a legume in uh as well, and then with squash and beans, right?
Yeah.
Beans as legumes, and so you see this synergy happening too, and I think that's why within that beef study actually is one of the strongest correlations that we found with the nutrient density of beef was plant diversity, especially with regards to phytochemical richness and omega-3 profiles. I mean, biological systems are inherently messy, and we probably understand not even half of it. But we did a series of correlations, and really one correlation that did shake out was the plant diversity piece with nutrient density, and suggesting, and perhaps it's not surprising, is that you get better fatty acid profiles, and you get a more diverse array of phytochemicals within that, and even more so than maybe, your traditional soil measures of soil organic matter, of total exchange capacity. It's also not that simple that is more zinc in your soil equals more zinc in your in your plant, or equals more zinc in your beef. It was not that simple. That correlation wasn't there, and it probably, in fact, there's some work to suggest that if you have less zinc in your soil, you got more in your plant, and so you get this paradox maybe. But on a whole, on the group level, what we did find in that beef study is that managing within a given ecoregion it as a biodiverse pasture versus managing it as a commodity crop field, you would see on a group level better soil health, more soil organic matter, more minerals, better total exchange capacity in those fields that were measured as.
That's so huge. That right there is worth the study, and the education is just. The diversity introduced has soil health implications, positive soil health implications that then get transferred to the meat product, whatever the meat product is, in this case, beef. And then that gets transferred to the beef. And so that there's a reason why we need that diversity. It's reflected in the beef. It's reflected in the flavor. And then it also continues on into the human health regime. It's amazing. It's really amazing. I have to emphasize that because it's almost unreal. I remember the first time when I read that ratio, that correlation that you found between the diversity and the 6-to-3 fatty acid ratio. I was like, what? I would have never guessed that. I'm not a scientist, but I would have never guessed that correlation.
Yeah, I mean, what it probably is related to this, Matt, green plants are very rich in the omega-3, alpha-linolenic acid, the plant omega-3. And if you can keep your pastures greener and you can have more diversity, you end up with just more omega-3s in your forages, and that translates 1-to-1 to the omega-3 content of the beef. That's clear. In an upcoming paper that that will come out, one of the students made a really nice graph. That's basically, we look at what's a concept called omega balance, because it's a little bit more intuitive and easier to display, but it basically is the proportion of omega-3s to total polyunsaturated fatty acids. So it would be omega-3s, the proportion of omega-3s to total omega-3s and 6. And you see that in a green plant, this is about 70%. So 70% of all PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, is omega-3s. And then you see this, I mean, it goes through the rumen, so it's not like 70% omega-3s in the forage equals 70% omega-3s in the beef. But it goes to about like 30 or 40%. And then you have like the TMR down here with a low omega balance, so low in omega-3s, and you can draw a straight line to the beef there that is also low in omega-3s.
And
So
TMR for listeners is like a grinder of grains and things to make a ration for a feedlot beef. But just
yeah,
wanted to explain that.
That's right.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. I'm so glad you're doing this work. Okay, before we wrap up, first of all, I've made a note that I want to buy my cheese and dairy from Europe. So just because of the practices. But I'd like to talk a little bit about it. It seems like there's this real awakening happening linked to high omega-6 ratios in the Western diet that leads to a consumer's desire to reduce seed oils and increase animal fat. We've seen it in our business. I've never really seen anything quite like this take off. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, what you can say about that.
Yeah, I'd say my interpretation of the literature and some of the findings that we've made, probably the big issue in the human diet is the absence of omega-3s. That's probably more concerning. The absence of omega-3s or low intakes of omega-3s is probably more concerning than higher intakes of omega-6. But I also acknowledge that there's a yin and yang involved in that, in the sense that if you are consuming more omega-3s, you're probably consuming less omega-6s. And they also compete for the same pathway within our body. So there is a relationship between them. But it does seem like it does seem in various correlation studies, it seems like that the absence of omega-3s is much more related to cognitive function, cardiovascular disease risk than perhaps the high omega-6 intake. But if you are bringing down your seed oil intake or omega-6 intake, probably by definition, you're going to up your omega-3 intake. So so I think that is the main thing also that we found. And an interesting part on this is that, yes, the omega-6s in grass-fed beef are a little bit lower, but they're not that much lower.
Yep.
But what does make a 2-3-fold jump is the omega-3s. And that's why you get this beneficial omega-6 to 3 ratio in grass-fed beef. And another important nuance to this is that we actually did a study where we fed everyone foods from regenerative or pasture-based systems versus from conventional systems. But we gave them whole foods. For me, as a nutrition scientist, if it's hard to give them, feed them ultra processed foods. Now, actually, we're doing a follow up study on that where we actually just give people only the meat and the eggs, and we are telling them just consume your habitual diet as you normally would. But in this other study that was funded by the Green Acres Foundation, we gave them whole foods exclusively. So we also gave them all their produce, and just not consuming a standard American diet was by far the major driver for their health. What we found in that study is that even if
the fact that they were eating whole foods,
just eating whole foods, yeah. And even they were consuming feedlot beef, but they still got healthier because they just weren't eating like a bunch of ultra processed foods. So that got them there. One thing that we found in the study, though, and this was like 7 weeks on each diet, is that the regenerative diet got them to a healthier level of blood work. So less triglycerides, better other lipoprotein profiles, cholesterol profiles. They got them a little bit faster.
Oh, okay.
So that is the thing. So maybe that means that if you consume a regenerative, foods from regenerative agriculture for 30 years, maybe that has a benefit. But just not consuming a standard American diet will probably get you 80-90% of the way there. So that is an important part, because the circulating omega-6 to 3 profile of people at baseline was 60. So 16 to 1.
16 to 1.
Yeah, 16 to 1. But just putting on a whole foods diet, even on the conventional diet with feedlot beef and conventional chicken and pork, it got them to an omega-6 to 3 ratio of 11.
Okay.
Within 7 weeks.
That's a big percent reduction.
That's a big percent drop. Yes, they already had a drop. But if you consider it, like feedlot beef still has an omega-6 to 3 ratio of 8. So it's still a lot better than, it just tells you how poor the standard American diet is to begin with. And
so the standard American diet is more processed, less whole foods, more fried foods, probably more processed foods. And so making a meal at home, starting with whole foods as your ingredients, is probably a real key to improving your health.
It is, even if that means you cannot afford grass-fed beef. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's the key part. Indeed, that was a major finding. And of course, I mean, it's not to say that grass-fed beef we talked about. I mean, definitely on paper, the nutritional profile looks improved, and I would probably hypothesize that over longer periods of time, these things may make a difference. But yeah, in a 7-week trial, it was just like, it was so overwhelmed by just
7 weeks. That's a fast turnaround. 7
It's a fast
weeks.
turnaround. Wow. That's what's so fascinating. And we've seen this now in 2 studies. If you take people off a standard American diet, you can, their blood work, which probably like creeps up into not so favorable ranges over a 20-year period, you can undo a lot of that in like 2 months.
The new book, Dr. Van Vliet's 7-week challenge.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the challenge becomes after that, which is sticking with it.
Sure, you got to continue, but you can do something in 7 weeks.
It is amazing. Yeah. But it tells you how forgiving the body is, and it also tells you that it's never too late. Like you can indeed like
it's never too late.
Yeah, even in your 50s, 60s, right? You can, and you could probably, at least from a blood work perspective, like I said, maybe people had elevated glucose for like many years, but then from a blood work perspective, you can not see that. You typically you cannot, like you have pre-diabetes, and then you cannot say cure diabetes, but yeah, you can bring it in remission into the sense where if you don't go too far, there can definitely be some issues with the pancreas and things like that. If you don't take it too far, you can go back to a level where it's like it never even happened.
Wow. And that mirrors nature. So our bodies are resilient if we just adopt the right things based on what we learn. But nature is the same way. We can degrade a piece of land for 70 years and just take, till, spray, everything. But, you give me 7 years and I'll fix it. I'll get it to being regenerative and being much more productive than it was before those 7 years. And that's after 70 years. So there is hope. There is hope. And, maybe that's how we can wrap up is, what do you see for hope? And I think that's the study that you're just talking about in the 7 weeks is a great start. But is there anything else you'd like to add as far as what brings us hope for our food system and our health going forward?
Yeah, well, what brings me hope is that, at some point we do have to turn the corner on this. And I see this big increase in people wanting to know where their food comes from, how this is grown, what is the farmer behind this, and what is the nutrient density within this. And
what are the practices? It's like I say, it's not enough to know your farmer's name is Joe. You got to know his practices, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Right. Keep going.
No, but then I think that's the part that gives me hope in the sense that this is definitely on the rise. This sort of movement, this interest in I mean, nowadays we call it regenerative agriculture. Back in the day, you call it agroecology, and Sir Albert Howard in the 40s called it integrated agriculture, and probably 400 years ago, we just called it agriculture. But right, we were forced to have integrated systems because we couldn't put a bunch of synthetics inputs onto our fields. But anyway, not to get off too much of a tangent, is that this idea of like rekindling this knowledge and this movement where more consumers are becoming more educated. There's more data that comes out about like, hey, like you said, like I didn't know plant diversity was linked to omega-3 profiles. And now we're also finding is that plant diversity is linked to phytochemicals, and those phytochemicals enhance the flavor of your beef and your strawberry. And I think having that knowledge, well, could potentially drive the consumer and B, can also perhaps ultimately drive policy and get a bigger adoption of this. And I see this too, where bigger players within the retail space are also starting to pay attention to this now as well, and perhaps wanting to know more about food sourcing, because the angle there may be indeed better for the environment, but then also creating flavors. Arguably, even more so than health, flavor is the reason why people eat the foods that they eat. So if we can improve flavor that way, um, I think what gives me hope that this is a movement that is continues to grow.
Well, it's such important work, and I know in my 35 years of being involved in food and farming, agriculture in some way, I totally agree that the wind is at our back. People are starting to ask more questions about where their food is raised, how the practices that went into raising their food, and there's so many benefits to just asking those questions, voting with your dollars, and then the policy and the mindsets will shift. And we see it happening. So I'm glad you see it happening as well. It's happening in our lives and our business on this end. So thank you very much, because it's your data, your studies that are going to help open those eyes. It's so important. There's so few people doing it, and you're a rock star in the industry, Dr.
So
Van Vliet.
thank you so much, man. I do want to acknowledge that it is not just me. There's a lot of people that contribute to this. A lot of collaborators within this space. So it's definitely a team effort, and also of course farmers such as yourself, because that are doing this movement and are stimulating research into that. So. Thank you for that. I sometimes think that a lot of what I do is just, how do you say it? Putting some data behind or testing a notion that farmers oftentimes already have.
Well, it's true, but without the data, it's just anecdotal, Matt saying or whatever. So, a farmer knowing it, but the data is so important. The study is so important. And what makes you such a pleasure to work with is that you're so kind and so humble. And yes, it's a team effort. We got team on this end, you got a team on that end, and there's broader teams working on this. So together, let's make this place better than we found it. Again, I so appreciate your time. You're very generous with your time today. You're going to enlighten many, many people with the information that you shared, and I so appreciate you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, man.